So the first thing that I really would give a tip on is my graphs, or the graphs that you use. I'm just gonna assume that everyone knows a proper in and out graph, so I'm not gonna really go over that. Rather, I'm gonna go more into like my mid graphs and a certain bounce graph that I use. So for mid graphs, I would say that carries a lot of my edits. Honestly, 80% of my edits use mid graphs. So my mid graphs are really easy. What I usually like to do, I'm just gonna bring this closer, is I like to start one like right here, a couple frames before it, and I'm just gonna turn this to a 3D layer, but I'm just gonna use Z position, which is the last one right here. But I start like my first keyframe like a couple frames away from the first beat, and then I put my second keyframe like a frame or two after like the next beat. And I'm just gonna do something simple. I'm just gonna do something like this, and then I ease it. I have motion blur, make sure that's turned on, and I always use speed graph. I don't like using value graph unless I'm trying to have it get a little bit of a bounce, because speed graph gets it all done for me. There's really no need for me to use value here. So then after that, I line my graph up to the beat. So the tip of the graph will line up with the beat marker. Like this is where the beat will drop. So then you should get something that's kind of like this. And then you can play around with it for smoothness. For example, if you want more of like a intense transition, you can move it more close together. But yeah, so then you'll get like a intense graph backwards. And if you want it more on the softer end, you can just move the little lines back. So I'm looking to keep it aggressive just because I feel like it fits better with no music. But yeah, that's my graphs. And then to kind of keep the movement going, I use nulls. It's super simple. All I do is I parent this, and then when making the second set of transitions, I usually put the first keyframe like a frame behind like the previous beat. So it will usually line like close to the middle, depending on how far your keyframes are. And then I put the second keyframe a frame after the next beat. And let's just say I move it back up again. The graphs are the same and everything. So yeah, that would be like my mid graph. And you can see like, although it's very faint, you can see the slight movement still within the image, which is what I aspire to do. And that's why I kind of overlap my keyframes like that. So there's not really a quote unquote break. So yeah, that's my mid graph. The next graph I'm gonna show you guys is going to be my bounce graph. So for my bounce graph, I usually use this for my shapes, which I'll get a little more into later, like in the tutorial. This is like the graph I use to have the image kind of pop up. And I use this mainly for shapes. When I use it for photos, I use it more like my glitchy edits, but this is a really good graph in general. I'm gonna do it with scale because it's the most noticeable. This graph I use value for. And literally what I do is I pull this keyframe way up. So I pull it at least a little bit over the other keyframe, and then I pull this one super close like this. So you have like this little kind of hill over that line, and then you get this kind of effect where it bounces up really quick. The more you pull like this keyframe up, the more intense the bounce will be in general. So I wouldn't recommend pulling it up that high, because when you pull up super high, it does like this weird stuff, and like it doesn't look so smooth anymore. I more so play with the other keyframe for like the speed of it. So if you went a little slower, you could pull it back like all the way back here. If you went fast as hell, you could pull it all the way over here. It also works really good for rotation too, which is kind of why I use it more for my shapes layers, which I'll get a little bit more into when I explain all the shapes and stuff. But you can kind of have it like on its side like this, and then do like the same sort of thing And then you see it has like this little down, so it kind of like feels like a shake. I use it all the time. It carries everything for me. And yeah, so that's my main graphs. The next thing I'm gonna talk about is like overlays. I'm not gonna go too deep into this. Overlays is kind of just, it adds a little bit of life to your edit. And overlays could be like for shapes and for PNGs you find like on Pinterest. For example, if you kind of want to add more emphasis to like this transition, you can add a little like border that will pop in and pop out real quick. So for example, you can do this, and then you can like have it appear when she goes back like here. And how you would do that is you would move this either up and like to these two or up and down. And what I like to do is I like to actually like unlink these and then put this to 0. And this will also be a mid graph. So you do that, and like suddenly like you kind of have like a little bit more life to your edit. And you see how it kind of pops like right here. Just play around with some transparency, and you can kind of have it like slowly like fade in, so it doesn't like appear suddenly. So yeah, like overlays like that, but also like the normal PNG overlays. The next thing I would say I use a lot in my edits is a lot of rotation. What I like to do, like I like to make, when I'm using mid graphs, I love making like everything 3D just so I can use like all the different rotations. So you kind of like, for example, I can like have it go like this, keyframe it, and then in the second one I can kind of like go like the other way. But like just adding a new angle kind of like spices up like a simple like scale rotation, adds flair, makes it look really good, makes it look really in depth and stuff like that. I'm just gonna talk about my like positioning of like my shape layers. So a really good recommendation is to utilize the fact that the star layer is super like versatile, so you can get away with a lot with the star layer, because it has this really handy thing where you can make like, you have like 80,000 points, and it makes really like good spirally kind of transitions. I like to kind of position it like in front of it, but kind of like have it be off screen to give like this sense of depth. And then what I do with the graph that I showed you guys, I will add like a quick bounce transition. So you click this chain link and you kind of just make it like super wide in like one direction. I'm gonna do it in this direction like this, and then you add like some rotation to that, and then give it like the slight rotate in any direction that you want. So I'm gonna just do it this way, and you use the bounce graph that I talked about before. You get like this really cool just pop-up animation, and I would say that like this combination makes a lot of my overlays and my effects. So kind of like that. It gives movement. And another thing I would say you can kind of use as well, so you know how kind of like you can see it like very visibly, it kind of will unintentionally clash with the photo because both things are in perfect view. You can add blur just a little bit, and suddenly, like, while yes the object is there, but it also still keeps your attention on the photo that you're using. So just keep that in mind. So that's how I use my shapes. My next thing, I guess, would just be colors. I use colors a lot to pop my edits out, if you can't tell. I don't really like working with like a black background or at all, mainly because like I like colors. So like for example, for this edit, I would probably like do some like pink And then to kind of make stuff pop out even more, I would also probably add like, I'll duplicate it, like blur it, but then like add like maybe like a halftone type thing, and then play around with the colors on that. So since I'm going for like a kind of a pink flow, I would like maybe go like on like a darker pink, and then I'll use this and I'll make this part white. But yeah, like I use colors a lot, and then like the shape colors matter too. Like any color that plays off of each other really makes transition just more special. And the last thing, the very last thing for this tutorial would just be coloring. I have had so many edits that I think are like terrible, and then I add a coloring over it, and suddenly it's the best thing in the world. My favorite things to use is the S curve, only because it gives like kind of like this richness to it. And I also like to use pop, but not in like the sharp way. I kind of like to use it for like the soft way. And then I kind of just play around with it sometimes, and I would recommend that to everyone too. Like, get like a general like base for your coloring, and then just add things, play around with it, see if it like would change anything. And then I like to add the edge softness, kind of like only to the corners. Lens distortion works really well. I also add some of this spot exposure if it's not already too bright. And then I want you guys to like look at like the literal difference. Yeah, that's pretty much it. That's how I edit. I hope you guys enjoyed, but if you guys have any questions, just let me know. And yeah. All right, I'm gonna shut the fuck up now. Have a good night, guys.